Hello, everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future. And today my guest is Julian Lindley-French. Hi, Julian. How are you?
Very well. Good to see you, Jacek, and Happy New Year to you and all your great viewers.
Yeah. Happy to you. Happy New Year to you as well, to your family and all people that wish you best. And I wish you the best. And I love talking to you. From time to time, we discuss the strategic matters. Just to remind everybody, Julian is the chairman of Alphen Group, a prominent circle of people with strategic vision in UK and Europe and elsewhere. Julian was working for NATO, was a prominent scholar and kind of a person that influenced NATO evolution throughout the years. I hope that in this short description, I managed modestly at least to describe. So
You've
you're
certainly boosted my ego, Jacek, which is great.
okay, perfect. Before we start recording, I just mentioned to Julian that I just returned from Kiev. I was with my team of Strategy and Future in Kiev, per invitation of people that I find patriotic, that were baptized in the baptism of fire in war, and now I think they have a strong vision of Ukraine of future. And this was exactly then Julian told me, why don't you start recording? Let's talk about it. So I'm coming back from Kiev, from the Dnieper River, with some refreshing thoughts about intermarium, Poland, equilibrium, the future U.S. posture with this new administration, many things of strategic importance. But trying to take advantage that Julian is with me, maybe I will ask you a few questions and let's have a lively discussion. You know, the most important thing is what surprised. I mean, what is the most surprising in January 2025? Let me ask this question for you.
The most surprising thing to me, Jacek, is it's not surprising. Um, to be blunt, have pretty much called the war in Ukraine correctly. Um, I see the world as I feared I would see it, and I see Europe as I feared I would see it. I always have the hope. I'm a Yorkshireman. We don't do optimism in Yorkshire, but I'm the most optimistic Yorkshireman you'll ever meet.
Okay.
But what I do sense is that our leaders, with due respect, are simply not up to the job, the challenges of this world. And I think what we've seen in Ukraine is a country forging itself in fire. There's no other way to put it. But I also think that the West collectively has let the Ukrainians down. And I always predicted, regrettably, that would happen. I'm an analyst. I'm not a commentator as such. I don't want things. I analyze things. Of course, I want things, but my job is to analyze. And what I analyze, the evidence is uncomfortable. That once again, whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan or the Middle East or Ukraine, the West just lacks strategic patience, and Europeans are so self-obsessed with domestic issues. The most telling figure, Jacek, that I read in the Frankfurter Allgemein in November was that Europeans represent 9.3% of the world's population, but they spend 60% of global expenditures on social welfare. That to me was the figure that summed up Europe's problem, but also Europe's opportunity, because we could adjust expenditure if our leaders had political courage and strategic insight and properly fund Europe's defense. But I'm not holding my breath, Jacek.
I know it's a very tough sell for the, democratic societies to tell them, that, guys, we need to spend more for the military and conscript your sons and daughters because the
Why? Why is it tough? Isn't it called leadership? Isn't it the
exact
very thing that we pay our politicians
I
who have
want
all their fancy cars and their advisors and all? Isn't that what their job is? To
perfect,
lead? And I
perfect.
think we're seeing a failure of leadership.
that was a little bit of tease that I want. Actually, it's great that I kind of made you enter this comment, because this is exactly about leadership. About leadership. Increasingly, I think so, and I also increasingly think that across Europe and also to some degree in the US, the establishment failed people. Not only in the matters of war, but also in supply chains control, and this geostrategic kind of competition that has been with us for many years, and this systemic confrontation that we are witnessing now was predictable. I mean, and they could
Totally.
totally, totally, and of course we can now complain about the need to change the balance between social expenditure and the military expenditure, just like, by the way, Great Britain prior to the First World War, when its fleet had to redress itself when I remember Labour Party, introduced this social reform, right? And
Liberal Party.
the Liberal Party, okay, and Admiral Fisher had to make changes in the posture of the British Navy, and it cost the Navy,
I mean,
the Navy, and
if I may interrupt, Jacek, the story is typically British.
yeah,
The Conservative government wanted 6 new super dreadnoughts in 1908, 1909. The Liberal Party, the opposition, wanted 4, so they compromised on 8. So it was a very typically British solution.
okay, okay, but okay, we have complained right now about leadership, so. I just came back from Ukraine as a light of hope. I'm just saying, but I'm not also doing work in the field of optimism. I'm regarded in Poland as a kind of a very sober-minded, so it will be a kind of a unexpected stance from my end. But I saw leadership in Kiev, in some parts of the government and officials. I saw hope. I saw stamina. I saw pride that I have been into the third year of war with a nuclear power, and they defended Kiev, that they extensively boosted the production of, in the salvo competition of UAVs and cruise missiles, their own indigenous. And they are increasingly in control of the salvo competition exchanges. And you felt it in Kiev, you felt it. And despite that on paper, people say that their GDP is they are the poorest country in Europe. I didn't see it, honestly speaking. It's not like, some countries around, let me put it, alongside the coastline of Mediterranean. Okay. This is engineering country. This is the people where engineers were born, inventions are created. And if the geopolitics and the Russian pressure is eased, I think they will have the space to prosper. I think so. If we manage to create equilibrium, and this is all it takes is a leadership and decisions. And of course, as a Pole, let me also complain a little bit to our Anglo-Saxon friends, upon whom always the Polish grand strategy relied heavily, as you know, from Mackinder and elsewhere, and also from our conversations. But there is what I fear is there is an increasingly painful realization in Poland that the United States has failed. First, it failed in this 3 Cs initiative, but not providing funds and real political support. It was an empty shell. Then it didn't support us in Nord Stream. Once the war broke, the deterrence in terms with respect to Ukraine, deterrence failed. Then Ukraine was not helped as it might have been helped in the autumn of 2022, alongside the Dnieper River, where the Russian army could have been obliterated. And the Americans were afraid of the decomposition of Russia, collapse, and so on. And the Ukrainians are telling me that. And of course, this escalation management, failure, which renders light on how the Americans are viewing the intermarium and, the Russian role at the end of the day. The last sentence. So we are kind of slowly but steadily moving toward our own equilibrium, should the Americans go to the offshore balancing posture. How would you comment to what I'm saying? Is it like nonsense? What do you think? What is your...
Not at all. Sound analysis, but where I would push back a little bit is, why blame the Americans for Europe's security disasters? The Americans are facing huge internal challenges. I mean, you look at their infrastructure, it's dated, it's aging, often inferior to that here in Europe. The Americans have a right to expect that we Europeans step up. Now, I want us to step up inside NATO, and this very week, the Alphen Group, Ambassador Sandy Vershbow and Dr. Hans Binnendijk and I have submitted a new Atlantic Charter to the administration called a new NATO deal for America, which we lay out what the Americans can reasonably expect from Europeans, and it will be an awful lot more than Europeans are currently giving to the alliance. So, it's very easy for us Europeans to sit back and blame the Americans. And sure, there have been failures of both leadership and strategy, not to mention policy, out of Washington. But that's partly because they're facing a global challenge. They're the only country on the planet that's having to deal with the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific as well, and all the complications therein of that particular multifaceted pan-spectrum challenge. So they've every right to turn around to Europeans and say, look, we're busy. What are you Europeans going to do about Europe? So ultimately, I do get a bit tired of Europeans, including my own country, blaming the United States. I've just published a new book called The Retreat from Strategy with General Lord Richards, the former British Chief of Defence Staff. And David and I do not pull our punches about Britain's failure to play its full role in European defence today. But you could apply that to the French, the Germans, and a host of other countries as well. And I would say the one country with a clear strategic understanding of Europe's place in the world and the actions that we must take is Poland. Poland, because of its history, because of its indomitable spirit, because of its refusal to give in to threats from any direction, however long it takes, whatever the cost. Poles understand the fundamentals of security and defense. Even if I have my concerns about the Tusk government at the moment, Poles themselves understand these issues. But the further west you go, the more decadent it is, the more people are simply focused on social welfare issues. They don't really believe that they're under threat. I mean, take my own country again. We're a nuclear-armed island with a highly advanced intelligence service. We know damn well that the Russians are not going to attack us. That would be suicide. But do we any longer have the solidarity for other Europeans? And I wonder, given that Britain, France, and Germany represent over 70% of Europe's defense investment, 90% of all research into new defense equipment in Europe, whether these three, the French, the British, the Germans, really have any solidarity with Poles and Balts and Ukraine in particular. And I would suggest the evidence is not. And sadly, I felt that was inevitable.
But apart from the leadership or lack of leadership, what has been the main reason driving this? Maybe because Russia is not that strong and the Western countries are not afraid of it, simply. They always think that there might be a deal as opposed to the Soviet Union. And as simple as that, yeah? And also there might be benefits of cooperation.
Yes, there is that, particularly in Germany's case. But there's also what I call the new appeasement. This is a political class that grew up in the post-Cold War era. For them, they bought into this whole nonsensical mantra of globalization, that if we were all mutually vulnerable, then war couldn't happen. They failed to understand that if you want to look through Putin's eyes, look through Putin's eyes. Don't project your ideas onto Putin and turn him into some kind of Western European liberal Democrat. He's a nationalist. That's always been his mantra. He's a former KGB officer. He was brought up in the KGB school of hard knocks. That's how he sees power. But our leaders have hollowed us out because they've increased the vulnerability by this kind of just-in-time concept that we don't need redundancy, we don't need resilience, we don't need depth in our society and economy. We don't even need defense because of just-in-time economics. And we've abandoned just-in-case reality. And we Europeans have really got to get back to just-in-case reality pretty damn quick, because it's what's coming, Jacek, is very dangerous indeed.
So what is coming, Julian? What tell us? Share with us your deepest, thoughts. What is coming, Julian?
If we continue on the path of willful weakness, if we continue in the belief that defense and security are discretionary expenditures that we don't really have to consider, if we continue in the belief that law, covenants without the sword, are somehow sufficient to maintain peace, there will be war. The balance of power between those who are schooled in the Western concept of liberal democracy, of a rules-based order, is not just being challenged, but it's being eclipsed by those who believe in power politics, the balance of power, 𝗬𝗏𝗁𝗃, 𝗪𝗏𝗁𝗃. And by the way, that also includes President Trump, who sees international relations as transactional, as a business deal. It's about the negotiation. It's about power. Laws without power are meaningless. And we in Europe have got fixated with this idea that if you pass a law, that is enough. Laws have to be enforced. Enemies and adversaries have to be coerced. They have to be deterred. And if you are to deter them, you deter them on their terms. And that means convincing them that you have the power and the will to frustrate any misadventures upon which they might choose to embark. And that's particularly where Europe has gone tragically wrong. Not, I would say, Central and Eastern Europe, but primarily decadent Western Europe.
But I'll try to dive deeper into those remarks that you've made. Let me not forget it. But one or two comments from my end on that. In Poland, that's why we went to Ukraine, because increasingly in the region, Ukrainians and Poles understand that in order to deter Russia, we need to create a balance of power between two of us and maybe Sweden, because you never know with the Americans these days, that will deter Russia. That will deter Russia in many domains of warfare, both conventional and hybrid. And it doesn't find proper understanding in the West with all those concepts, even how to end the war. This is so always West focused, without West, with West having no power, no residual power. My second comment, and also I would like to know your reaction to that, is maybe Donald Trump, with all his transactional approach, is the harbinger of the new era in the U.S. Role in the world, by discarding this primacy concept, where the United States was upholding the entire system like the ancient Atlas holding the landscape universe, saying, you know what, you were so disrespectful, guys. You didn't care and you didn't respect that we were, providing this security. So you know what? Now everybody goes Dutch. Let me put it that way. Everybody goes Dutch, and still, when everybody goes Dutch, we have the biggest pockets, we have the biggest bat, and we are the biggest. So we will, reshuffle the cards again, and we will be the largest, okay? And we will have our agency as towards Greenland, Panama Canal, trade policy, the protectionist policy against Europe, and you will need to obey, because you've been so disrespect. Kind of, do you think that there is this kind of thinking that if they come back to the hard power geopolitics in a, clear, evident way, the European will wake up to this new reality and they will also play this game, adjusting the tempo and stuff? How would you react to that?
Well, I think it's coming. We're in a kind of phony war before the inauguration, and I've been talking to senior members of the administration, and that's exactly where it's going. Trump is talking of achieving 5% GDP on defense. And I don't like these percentage things. That's why in the Atlantic Charter, what we've done is lay out the capabilities that Europeans should deliver, which would be 2/3 of all NATO capabilities by 2030, and an expeditionary warfare capability that means that if the Americans are busy elsewhere in the world, Europeans can handle Russia. That should be the ambition, but it's coming, and it's rightfully coming. It's time. It's time we Europeans stood up and showed that kind of leadership. There is a paradox in the American position, which I pointed out to senior members of the incoming administration, which is the more power that Europeans invest in defense, the less control that you Americans will have over NATO.
And they don't like.
I said I'm as blunt with them as I am with you. The bottom line is what the Americans would really like is a lot more European capabilities, much of it bought in the United States, and that they maintain complete control.
Yes.
Well, they're not going to get that. The more influential and powerful Europeans are, and let's hope that they are, we become more powerful, the more we will demand a say in what America does. So that's the kind of disconnect in American thinking. But the fundamental principle that Europeans effectively have to be able to deter the Russians as Europeans, irrespective of the Americans, is a sound principle in 2025. The alternative? Well, we Europeans are forced to live with far more risk by our leaders, i.e., my fellow Europeans in Poland, in the Baltic states, in Finland, in Sweden, but also in Ukraine, would have to live with far more risk from a resurgent and revanchist aggressive Russia, because the big powerful Western Europeans have chosen not to act, and that they can somehow get away with it. That's a choice that Trump will impose on us. And the Hague summit, in the NATO Hague summit in June, could well be a train wreck, unless we Europeans wake up to that. Now, that's why in the Atlantic Charter, we offer a plan to avoid a train wreck. But the status quo, the situation that we've known for so long, gone, over, finished. It's time to get strategically responsible and strategically serious here in Europe.
And how will the European leaders will react also to your propositions that you have now laid out in the context of potential tariff war against Europe that Trump has been, so eloquently declaring, protectionist measures against Europe, demand to decouple from China, that would break the social contract in Germany and elsewhere, of course, to the least extent in Poland. And wouldn't it send a signal to Europeans that, okay, guys, those Americans are crazy. They don't want to protect us anymore. This nuclear deterrence is a fake, is a bogus, because, there is a divergence of risk and resolve. So let's discard it. Let's move toward the continental consolidation trade deal with China. You know what? We will save peace. Macron is seemingly kind of suggesting it recently. I mean, over the last 3 months, I was listening to him in Sorbonne and elsewhere. He suggested that, in my opinion, between the lines. What do you think of this?
Well, Macron's a busted flush. So anything he says, it gets discounted very quickly. And if you think that China and the Chinese Communist Party offers Europeans a more restful period of strategic certainty than the Americans, however capricious they may be, then dream on, because it's, that's not going to happen. Now, European leaders will, in the first month of the Trump administration, when Trump is really making all sorts of threats, they'll run around like headless chickens, as they always do. There'll be lots of meetings convened. The European Council will meet. There'll be threats of counter tariffs. But in the end, they recognize that if Europe's really going to defend itself on its own, then it would have to really spend 5% of GDP on defense. And therefore, after all the threats that Trump has made, probably better to find an accommodation with him. And I think his coercion will work, because if Europe was to stand up to America and link, defense to tariffs, for example, we'd have to be united. But we Europeans are not united. We're completely divided. We have new governments coming in, probably Merz in Germany. The Starmer government seems to be lost in a kind of socialist fantasy in Britain. And the Macron government is hardly a government anymore. So, in fact, the Tusk government is about the only relatively stable government I can see across the landscape. Given that, we have little alternative than to find some accommodation with Trump, and that will come at a price. But given that we Europeans have been free riding for so many decades, probably a price that we really ought to pay.
Okay, but let's turn now to the US itself. There is internal conflict in US between the new establishment, maybe the emerging establishment behind Trump, and the old establishment. There is many consequences of some kind of imbalance in the US economy, middle class eroding, inner cities in conflict. And apparently, at least this is what I'm seeing, I don't know if you share my opinion, that there is a major clash between the forces of capitalism. Let me put it this old school phrase. Financial capitalism that has been with us since the 70s, ruling the waves of global economy, and the new that is coming. Whether this is this faction like O'Bannon that want to restore the steel houses on the banks of the Ohio River, that would require kind of creating the space where the yields of the capitalism will be forced to be invested somewhere else where the yields are not that great and not short term. And also this new business, new technologies, this new business where Musk and Thiel are representing a kind of leap forward, and there will be a major fight between the forces of capitalism in the shadow of the Trump's cabinet. And do you think that the Americans will pull it off and they will really clear their own pathway to become a successful country that will have enough power and stamina to really impose on affairs in Eurasia? Or we are seeing the decline in the US?
I don't see the decline of the US. There are the two most innovative forces on the planet are criminals and money. They're also the two most adaptive forces on the planet. The days of the Rust Belt, they're gone. They're over. This was a 19th, early 20th century industrial-based economy. Well, we're moving into a new economy in which deregulation, technology, and capital, far from fighting each other in America, they'll merge. They'll merge because money wants to make money. Technology is America's beating heart, and deregulation is the essence of the American way. In fact, if you want the greatest contrast between Europe and America, it's Europe's overregulation, which is killing growth, killing dynamism, just to keep bureaucrats and politicians comfortable. And this energy that America's got, and it is, if you look at American history, it's always been edgy. It's always been an experiment. It's always been pushing the envelope. That's the nature of America as a country, as a society. and they'll go doing that, and they're far more innovative than, say, China, which has huge internal. I would say that internal Chinese economic and social problems, and consequently the political problems downstream, are far more complex than America's. America's just doing what America always does, reinventing itself. I'm already seeing the major companies adapting to new technologies. I'm seeing major defense manufacturers adapt. I'm seeing a lot of this DEI culture being eroded in America. So I'm not. I'm more concerned that the Americans will simply leave Europeans behind. That we're simply not attractive. We're just old countries in decline, and we've accepted that. And there's no real US investment opportunities in Europe. And given that we are the biggest investors in each other on the planet, that could be a real threat. So I'm paradoxically not that pessimistic about the United States. It will find its way.
And how would you comment on the future prospective appointment of 𝗙𝗵𝗀𝗆 as main guy in the Pentagon responsible for policy, meaning strategy and U.S. deployments and the relationships with allies in Europe, given his record of promoting the offshore balancing, both in his book and in his public statements across like every day. So how would you react to that?
Imagine if the British government made me the Secretary of State for Defence, and people would be going, "Oh, have you seen that? Julian Lindley-French has been appointed Secretary of State for Defence," which will never happen, by the way. Given what he's written, given what he said, this is going to be very. Where's Britain going? Well, the moment you get into government and you start dealing with your civil servants, and you start dealing with checks and balances, and you start dealing with your military leadership in the DoD, then you get a very quick and heavy dose of reality. So, yes, I think there'll be some friction, and I would suggest that there is sufficient waste in the American military process that there could be some, shall we say, readjustment to the American defense effort that would make it even more efficient. So I'm not really that concerned, because I think the American constitutional system will prevent any extremes. Trump is going to test it. He's going to test the relationship down the Pennsylvania Avenue between Congress and the White House, no question. But I think the reality is, even with a Republican majority in the Senate and the House, that the American checks and balances at the heart of their Constitution will do what it does, which is prevent extreme behavior. So I'm not one of those Europeans who thinks that because Trump has been re-elected by the American people, re-elected with a clear majority, that the sky is falling. We're running around like headless chickens, going, "Oh, Trump has been re-elected." I think there will be some pressures, no question. It's the nature of the man. He is unpredictable, but I think there'll also be dynamism, and we need to not try to confront that, but try and work with it, given the centrality for the foreseeable future of the United States to our own interests, be they economic or indeed security.
And in that veil, also, what do you think about this apparent counter-revolution, cultural counter-revolution that Elon Musk even initiated, and people behind Trump, also Trump in his many declarations and statements after election day and before he's about to take office, about the kind of reversing all those policies that has been with us for so long, but also are a linchpin and a foundation of kind of ideology of many European leaders in the EU Parliament and elsewhere. How do you think it will kind of work? How it will build up the tension between the US and Europe? Because in a way it delegitimizes the European establishment, if it's successful. And you can see
Well,
first.
I think it shows that the European establishment is stuck in the past. I'm not sure it delegitimizes it, but it challenges the European establishment. And my God, does the European establishment need challenging? I mean, there are so many vested interests in Brussels, so much, so many people living off the European taxpayer without giving the European taxpayer too much back. In an age of revolution, of technological revolution, which Musk is at the forefront of.
Yeah.
Surely we in Europe should be saying, how do we adapt to this? Of course, establishments will present it as a threat, but it's only a threat to their grasp of power. Surely, from a European citizen's point of view, we should be asking ourselves, and our leaders asking themselves, is how do we benefit from these changes? Because these changes of technology, which do cross borders, which do cross ideas, which do drive forward the nature of governance, these are coming whether we like it or not. We can either stick our heads in the sand as Europeans and hope it all goes away, which it won't, or we can properly adapt. You know, I'm old. I remember in 2004, the EU, with great fanfare, came up with the Lisbon Agenda. We were going to modernize and innovate. We were going to be at the very cutting edge of technology. And where did it go? Absolutely nowhere. So the fault is not an American fault for leading change in the world, controlling change, generating change. The fault is European because we're stuck in the past, and we simply are too scared to adjust and adapt. Because why? Because it might weaken the institutions of the European Union. Because the European Union, in many ways, belongs to a different age. Because bureaucrats in Brussels might find it uncomfortable. Well, sorry, but it's time that we Europeans had a dose of Muskite reality and started adapting ourselves. Adapt or die. That's
So
the rule of
maybe
the world.
the last comment and the last request to comment for comment from your end. Maybe you will move forward being challenged like that, and of course discard the old school EU institutions with the name of further consolidation under the new framework to address the challenges from China, Russia, and United States as well in this new era. Do you think it's feasible that they will do so?
I used to work for the EU. I've had so many frameworks, so many policies, so many initiatives. They never go anywhere because they always lack ambition. They always lack unity. The essential struggle between the nation, the member state, and the Commission prevents real change taking place because European leaders are involved in a kind of perpetual daily civil war between the member states and the Commission. And then you've got Britain sitting on the outside post Brexit. So whenever I hear a new framework, it goes back to my original point that these are words, not action. There needs to be real action. And to my mind, that action can only come from the major state powers in Europe. That's Germany, Britain, France, Poland, maybe Italy. These are the major powers in Europe. And ultimately, given that it is the likes of America, China, Russia, who are dictating the rule of the road today, and in this new age of nationalism, then European powers, they are the ones that need to understand that and start playing by that rule so that we can maintain the peace. Because the obsession with institutionalism has undermined European power, not strengthened it.
Just to the last comment, if you're right and if your description is true, it just sounds like China in the first half of the 19th century, being embraced by this notion of pride and great glory. On paper, great GDP, and then the British sailors appeared.
Yes, I mean, we imposed power on a Chinese state that had become so sclerotic, so over-bureaucratized, that it was a house of cards that needed one push from an aggressive external power, which led to the Treaty of Nanking and the so-called unequal treaties.
Yeah.
Europe is a house of cards. And my concern is, without the real awakening of power in Europe, that someone will come and blow our house of cards down. And I don't want that. I'm a European. I want Europeans to organize our immense potential effectively. I want it to be led properly. And I want others to understand that we will always be open to friendship, but we will never accept threat or coercion. In that sense, this is a tipping point in the history of Europe, because we cannot go on with the platitudes and the irrelevancies that our leaders have been living off for the last 50, 60 years. Europe has got to stand up, Jacek, all of us.
Thank you, Julian. My guest today was Julian Lindley-French. That has been a spectacular conversation. Thank you very much. I hope that from time to time you will find time to talk to me about those turbulent times.
Always, Jacek. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and you stay with us.
Take care.
More podcasts.
Bye-bye.